Hey everyone, let's talk about who is Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin. The short take is we don't know. Nobody knows. There is zero proof that anyone has as to who the real identity is of Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin. So here's what happens. In 2008, on the cryptography mailing list, which is a mailing list of cypherpunks and cryptography experts and basically people who care about privacy, a person named Satoshi Nakamoto, who claimed he was, I believe, 46 years old and was from Japan, shows up completely unannounced on the Bitcoin, cryptography mailing list, and he posts a white paper on October 31st of 2008 describing a new technology called Bitcoin, and he goes into detail on how it's going to work. Then there's some, email traffic on that. A lot of people were skeptical. A lot of people were, questioned whether the technology could even be, brought into the real world. And then Satoshi Nakamoto, who obviously has computer programming skills, on January 3rd of 2009, released the software to the world for Bitcoin. And then over the next 18 months, between early 2009 and the middle of 2010, Satoshi Nakamoto answered questions. He worked on the software. People interacted with him. But every time somebody asked him any personal question, he would just respond to their technical questions, but he would leave the personal questions unanswered. And he, of course, did this because he was inventing something that could be the new monetary system of the world. And he determined that in a world where that was the case, perhaps central bankers that control the money in the world right now would not be super happy about that. And maybe that would mean they would not be super happy with him. But anyway, he released the software under an open source license, which means anybody can download it, anybody can use it. Nobody has the rights to copyright it. Nobody has the rights to patent it. And it's essentially a gift to the world. So he released the software that way, helped for 18 months, and then disappeared. And anyway, the day he disappeared, one of the developers that was helping on Bitcoin said that he was planning to have a meeting with, it was either the CIA or the NSA, one of the two, to tell them about Bitcoin. And Satoshi Nakamoto promptly said, well, he had moved on to other things, and then he disappeared. And so some people speculate that the two are related and that Satoshi Nakamoto figured that he could stay around to work on the Bitcoin code until it became too risky that his identity would be discovered. And other people speculate, that it was related to other things, etc. But those two things happened in close proximity to each other. So anyway, Satoshi Nakamoto handed over sort of the keys to the kingdom to other people. And because it was open source software, there really were no keys to the kingdom. It was just who controlled the bitcoin.org website. In fact, Satoshi Nakamoto, he registered bitcoin.org under an anonymous domain registration system so that nobody would know who registered the domain. And he actually wanted bitcoin.com, but it was unavailable. It was already registered and required a cost to pay someone else, and there was no way he could do that anonymously. So he did bitcoin.org instead, and then ultimately bitcoin.com was used for other things, and that came into play in the block size wars when the big blockers, from my video 2 videos ago, or the video before this one, the big blockers ultimately registered bitcoin.com and used it to fight their side of the battle, and bitcoin.org was controlled by the small blockers who ultimately won the battle. But anyway, so we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. What we know is that he had an incredible understanding of economics, of mathematics, of game theory, meaning how to use incentives to structure systems to be sustainable. So he understood game theory, incentives, monetary policy, and he was a very skilled computer programmer, which the fact that all of that exists in one human being is absolutely insane. I mean, I just cannot believe that a single human being could have all of the knowledge and skill to invent a new monetary system of the world. But Satoshi Nakamoto did. And then after the first version, he had a lot of help from a lot of very skilled software developers all over the world that helped him after that before he disappeared. So the only time he was heard from after 2011 was a news outlet. I think it was, I can't remember. It was one of the major news outlets found a person whose name was Dorian Nakamoto, and they thought they had found the real Satoshi, even though it was not the real Satoshi Nakamoto. And Satoshi made a post from one of his old email addresses saying, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto." And he did that so that the news media would stop harassing poor Dorian Nakamoto, who knew nothing about Bitcoin, but who was getting harassed by news claiming that he was the real Satoshi, even though he wasn't. So Satoshi was nice enough to, I guess, send one last message to tell everyone that, he was not Dorian Nakamoto. Dorian Nakamoto was not the real Satoshi Nakamoto. But then Satoshi Nakamoto has never been heard from since. The only other time in 2015, during the block size wars, an email was sent from one of Satoshi's accounts that essentially took the side of the small block community, although it was sort of indirect. But people hypothesized that maybe his account had been taken over or hacked. And so nobody ever really could agree in 2015 whether that final email really was from Satoshi or that was from his account. But, at that point, nobody knew if his account had been compromised or what. But anyway, the good thing is it doesn't matter. Bitcoin is supported and maintained by many of the most skilled software developers in the world. It's been embraced by Fidelity and BlackRock and the largest firms on Wall Street, and is held by hundreds of millions of people around the world on its way to billions. So who is Satoshi Nakamoto? We don't know. We'll probably never know, and it doesn't matter. And the amount of Bitcoin that Satoshi Nakamoto owns that from early mining, so he was one of the first people that did Bitcoin mining in addition to others, that Bitcoin is spread across between 20,000 and 30,000 different wallets. And all of the people like me do not believe, first of all, none of that Bitcoin has ever moved in 15 years. And secondly, everybody like me believes that Satoshi purposefully burned the keys to that Bitcoin so that it would never move. So some people speculate that maybe that Bitcoin is still accessible sometime by Satoshi Nakamoto. I am certain that it is not. I think it's extremely unlikely because I know, being a Bitcoiner myself, I know the mentality of someone like him. And I'm certain the mentality of someone like him was to say, as soon as it started to take off and as soon as it started to gain traction, then someone like him is sitting around thinking, wait, I've got Bitcoin equal to, in his case, 5% of all the Bitcoin that would ever exist, which is larger because the largest holders right now have about 1%, companies like MicroStrategy. So he's got more than anyone else has. And I'm certain that he decided in a moment of strength that even though he could one day become the richest person in the entire world, if Bitcoin, I think right now he would technically be the 25th richest person in the world, I think is the way the math works. But even with the ability to one day potentially be the richest person in the entire world, I am certain that Satoshi Nakamoto decided in a moment of strength to burn the keys or throw away the hard drive or smash it with a sledgehammer or whatever it is that would simulation. So if you talk to people, they each have their sort of pet hypotheses. But I can tell you just personally, every time I've been, had a thought of who Satoshi Nakamoto might be, then I do additional research, and there ends up being just as much evidence to prove that they were not Satoshi as there is to prove that they might be. So everybody who ever studies it seems to come up blank, and with the conclusion that we just don't know, and there's just no evidence that really software. So it's been more than 13.5 years, more than 13 years since Satoshi Nakamoto was involved. The project has moved along beautifully, even in his absence. And at this point, it's completely irrelevant who Satoshi Nakamoto is because, the project is a completely decentralized project all over the world. And so it just totally doesn't matter. But regardless, it's a super cool story. And I anticipate one day there will be a, blockbuster movie of some sort that talks about story. And last thing I'll say is the selfless act of creating Bitcoin and then giving it to the world in a way that you would never get any of the accolades is really, really amazing. It reminds me of when George Washington, who could have been king of the United States, stepped down after only 2 terms as president and said, 2 terms is enough. I'm moving on. I'm, going back home, etc. There are very few times in human history that humans take a terms, and therefore he would not become a default, essentially, king that served for life. And in the case of Satoshi Nakamoto, by having a huge amount of Bitcoin, in this case only 5%, but 5% is something that today would be worth, tens of billions of dollars, many tens of billions of dollars, and to be in a position where knowing you could have all that wealth, but if you ever actually tried to use it, you would lose your anonymity or risk losing your anonymity, and instead gift the idea of Bitcoin to the world. I think Bitcoin is the most transformative technology of the 21st century, and its genesis story by someone who hopefully we will never know who they are, Satoshi Nakamoto, which is a pseudonym. Everybody knows that's not their real name. We just don't know what their real name is. The selfless act of giving the technology to the world and then disappearing and never actually using any of the Bitcoin you even have, that's just pretty incredible. So anyway, and if they ever do show up and they highly unlikely at this point, and I think it's probably better if the world just never knows who Satoshi Nakamoto really is. So once again, hopefully these videos are either informative, entertaining, or at a minimum at least worth the time it took to watch. And you can always crank them up to 1.5x or 2x, and that way if they're not as informative as you were hoping, at least you spent less time. Enjoy.